alive and he's living on the inside, roaring like a lion, like God is not dead. He's surely alive and he's living on the inside, roaring like a lion, like God is not dead. He's surely alive and he's living.
I'm continuing in my sermon series dealing with a view of the cross. My sermon's entitled this morning, A View from the Ground. Jara and I were on our honeymoon. We were in the Ozark Mountains. And we were driving down the very scenic Highway 71. And we came up on Boston Mountain. Now, when this is all over with, Jared will tell me all the details I got wrong, but just go along with me. We came up on Boston Mountain. Now, Boston Mountain was the highest point in the Ozark Mountains. And we pulled over. There's a little gift shop there and whatnot. And there, stretching toward the sky, was this observation tower. It was very primitive. And you just started walking the stairway until you got to the top. Well, Jared didn't want to go up there. Jared's got a little bit of thing called a fear of heights. But she loves me. And so she's learned better. But she loves me, and she went up the stairway with me. And we got, after several dozen flights of stairs, we got to the top and walked out on the platform, and there was nothing up there but a railing around the top. And it was just so beautiful just looking out across the landscape. And I started talking to Jared and realized that she was nowhere around me. Jara was back at the stairway, sitting down. Not because she was tired, because she wanted to get closer to the ground. And I think I encouraged her, and she managed to make it to close to the railing. But when you're on top of a mountain and it's windy and you're in a steel structure, guess what happens to that steel structure? She did not like the swing. I don't know why. I can't figure that out. Anyway, I learned then that a man and a woman may envision the same goals in their lives, perhaps, though, not from the same altitude. And so today, we're in a sermon series called A View at the Cross, and today we're looking at a view from the ground, from the unique perspective of the centurion that was on guard and on duty there at that time. Look in your scripture text at Luke chapter 23, verse 44. Luke 23, verse 44. It was about noon, and darkness came over all the land until about 3 in the afternoon, for the sun stopped shining. Now, it's important to note this. It said the sun stopped shining. It does not say the sun was covered by the clouds. It does not say that a storm came up, as you see in many a movie. It just says the sun stopped shining. Well, how can that happen? Ask God, the creator of the universe, how that can happen. The sun stopped shining, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. Jesus called out in a loud voice, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." And when he had said this, he breathed his last. The centurion, seeing what had happened, praised God and said, "Surely this was a righteous man." When all the people who had gathered to witness this sight saw what took place, they beat their breasts and they went away. But all those who knew him, including the women who had followed him from Galilee, stood at a distance watching these things. The centurion was on duty. And one of the things that he saw that day was the centurion saw mercy. He saw mercy. This was a man who commanded at least 100 other men. The centurion was the backbone of the Roman army as far as their officer command structure. Anytime we read about an officer in the Bible, it's going to talk about a centurion. A centurion was in command of at least 100 men. That's where we get the term century from. And so it was a pretty important position, and his job was to make sure that this criminal named Jesus suffered and died for his crimes against the Roman state. At least that's what his typical duty was. And he carried that duty out very well. And I honestly believe, being a centurion and being in command of 100 men, that he probably had 100 men on duty that day, guarding the cross, guarding the route, and making sure that there were no riots or troublemakers. The Romans as a whole were a merciless lot. And when it came to Jesus, he had been shown no mercy. Jesus had been given no mercy. Beaten, flogged to an unrecognizable form, beard pulled out, crown of thorns thrust on his head, his hands and feet pierced by nails. Let me ask you something. What kind of a man does it take to hold down another man's arm and take a nail and a hammer and sit there and drive it through the man's flesh? I don't care how strong you are, it's not going to be done with one stroke of the hammer. It's going to take several. And to get it done in such a way as to not sever an artery or cause excessive blood flow, but to sit there and hammer into a man's flesh that nail. What kind of a man can do that? To the Roman centurion, Jesus was just another sentenced criminal. They did crucifixions like Baskin Robbins does Sundays. Jesus was just another sentenced criminal that demanded Roman justice. Jesus had been given no mercy. Being wrongly punished, though, he saw that Jesus gave forgiveness. It says in another passage, 2 other men, both criminals, were also led out with him to be executed. When they came to the place called the Skull, they crucified him there along with the criminals, one on his right, the other on his left. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." In the midst of suffering, he brought relief. In the midst of suffering, he brought relief. You know, sometimes I like to think of myself as a tough man. But I tell you, if I even start to get an inkling that I'm starting to get a headache, where's the ibuprofen at? Jared, where's the ibuprofen? I think I got some in my office, in my car, in my home. Anywhere I might possibly need ibuprofen or Tylenol, I've got some. Okay, maybe I'm not as tough as I thought I was. And if I get a really bad headache, just leave me alone. Let me suffer in peace, people. But while Jesus, my pain, uncomparable even to the nth degree, compared to what Jesus went through, in the midst of his entire body screaming in agony and pain, his mouth was uttering words of forgiveness. In the midst of his suffering, he sought relief for others. While he was on the cross, you were on his mind. Because he wasn't suffering for the sake of suffering, he was suffering for your sake. He suffered so that you would not have to. So the centurion saw mercy that day as he stood at the foot of the cross. It had probably been the only time in his life that he had ever heard, or that he would ever hear, a convicted, a sentenced, in the process of being killed person saying, forgive them. Forgive them. But that's what Jesus was all about, forgiveness. The centurion saw mercy. The centurion also saw compassion. Have you ever picked up a hitchhiker? Some of you, yes. Some of you, no. I've seen too many of them movies. Those hitchhikers, they're nasty business. And it can be dangerous, especially in today's time. I have at times. Sometimes I feel compassion for someone who may not be as fortunate as me to have a vehicle to drive. A man named John was driving home late one night when he picked up a hitchhiker. As they rode along, he began to be suspicious of his passenger. John checked to see if his wallet was safe in his pocket of his coat that was on the seat between them. But it wasn't there. So he slammed on his brakes. And he ordered the hitchhiker out, and he said, hand over the wallet immediately. The frightened hitchhiker handed over a billfold, and John drove off. When he arrived that night, he started to tell his wife about the experience when she interrupted him, saying, before I forget, John, do you know that you left your wallet at home this morning? Not so much compassion. But Jesus, in the midst of his suffering, he had compassion. He had compassion. The centurion heard him provide for his mother. Here is Jesus. He is struggling to breathe, excruciating pain, shooting from the feet to the very top of his head, and everywhere in between, incredible thirst under scorching heat, heart hammering away, just trying to keep up and keep his body alive. And while being traumatized, look at John chapter 19, verse 25. Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother and his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. And when Jesus saw his mother there, and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to her, woman, here is your son. And to the disciple he said, here is your mother. And from that time on, the disciple took her into his home. While Jesus is suffering, what's on his heart and what's on his mind? You are. What's on his heart, what's on his mind? His mama.